Being a police officer, the number one thing is about strict accountability. You're either going to pretty much do right or you're going to do wrong. One of the key things that I would say that I learned from, again, my time as being a police officer, obviously about the strict accountability, is just applying it unilaterally throughout my life. The way that you do anything is the way that you do everything. Every traffic stop, I can tell you, I had a little bit of fear, and there's nothing wrong with being afraid, but sometimes you still need to take action in spite of that fear.
Welcome to the Leadership and Love podcast. We will cover leadership, mindset, personal development, and sales and marketing. You will experience thought-provoking conversations with both nationally and internationally recognized leaders. Our goal is to inspire you and deliver actionable items that you can implement that are going to help you accelerate your growth. Get ready to discover the magic and the power when you lead with love. Welcome back, everybody, to another amazing episode of Leadership and Love. I am so excited today because I've got somebody that I kind of brought on kicking and screaming, but I know he's going to have great wisdom. He's a dear friend of mine, Martin Neal from Minuteman Press in Libertyville. Martin, thank you very much for joining us today.
Yeah, no problem. Anytime. Thanks, Louie. Thanks for having me.
You're more than welcome. Truly my pleasure. From the streets of Cabrini Green to the squad car, Martin Neal's journey is one of resilience and determination. Now, I want to pause for a minute because people listen to this across the country and actually in 14 other countries. So for those of you that don't know, Cabrini Green at one point was a really poor, rundown ghetto slum area in Chicago. So what Martin's saying by using the words Cabrini Green is he really came from the wrong side of the tracks, from nothing, to make something of himself. So that alone makes you an incredible leader. Building a successful real estate portfolio as a passive investment while serving on the force for 14 years. He then traded in his badge for a briefcase, founding a thriving print company. We're honored to have him share his story with us today. So Martin, again, welcome. And I'd like you to start with a part of your story. Can you describe for our listeners so they have an idea of really what you grew up in and then how you got out of that to head down the path of a much better life?
As I said, I did grow up in Cabrini Green, coming from, just not well off. My family had what they had, and their circumstance were their circumstance for whatever reason it was, and that's the life that I lived in growing up. And so the way that I got out of was it essentially was just time. I mean, it wasn't anything fancy. My family didn't hit some jackpot, some lottery. I went off to college and life moved on, progressed.
And so Martin just did a beautiful job of exemplifying something I think that's really important. He could have spent this entire podcast moaning and groaning and hating the fact that he was born in the environment he was. He pretty much condensed it into, it was what it was, we did what we did, and then we moved on. That's a great way to approach your story because it's just that. It's a story of some things that happened in the past. Martin, I really appreciate that kind of perspective, especially when, I think we all have a tendency to measure how tough our childhood or our life was. And there's people like you who had it much harder, much rougher, and for much longer. So tell us, how did you get from college to being a police officer?
I mean, just like most young kids at that age, I didn't know what I wanted to do with life. I was attracted to sports, like most young boys at my age, and key factors that pushed me to being a police officer was I was literally just finishing up my freshman year of college and trying to figure out what it is that I want to do in my life. And I was watching TV. I was watching a movie, and in the movie, they had unfortunately a gruesome rape scene in it. And I made the decision right then and there. I want to be one of the people in the world who's trying to prevent those who's doing heinous crimes like that. I want to be someone in the world who prevents those types of crimes or those types of crimes or catch those types of criminals. And from there, I went down the path to figure out how to become a cop.
So can you tell us and it's funny how we all have that moment, right, where something happens and it just triggers the clarity of our purpose. Can you tell us about what did you learn about leadership and working on a team being a police officer?
Oh, so being a police officer, the number one thing is about strict accountability. Everything from a black and white standpoint. Many of the people that you're going to run across, as I was doing the police officer job, they want to tell you about the mitigating circumstances about their life and why they had to do wrong in some way, shape, or form. And being a police officer, you're put in a situation where you're either gonna pretty much do right or you're gonna do wrong. You're either gonna arrest them or you're not going to arrest them because here's the line in the sand has been drawn, and it's our responsibility to enforce the law accordingly. I was one who, had to learn strict accountability because if I decided one day that I'm not going to arrest this person, then typically you'll see the consequences of that action come back and play itself off, and it'll hurt you directly or indirectly.
Yeah, I think that's very important. So for our listeners, one of the word I like to use is personal responsibility, right? We're all responsible for our actions. So he just dropped another golden nugget if you're a leader, and that is and we want to do this, right? If we break the rules, if we break the law, we think our story, our reason, our excuses, our BS is makes it okay, and it's not certainly not the way you lead, and it's certainly not how you want to live your life as an example to other people. And I also like to talk about what was it like for you to be a police officer of color? Did people give you a harder time? Was it easier? Can you talk about that too?
I don't. It didn't matter if you was a police officer, white or black, you were getting it in some way, shape, or form. Obviously, I felt a certain type of way getting it from black people as I was a black officer. Definitely, I could tell you 1,001 stories about that. But I mean, one of the key things that I would say that I learned from again my time as being a police officer, and obviously about the strict accountability, is just applying it unilaterally throughout my life, and seeing how the way that you do anything is the way that you do everything. I'm a firm believer that if you're sloppy in your personal life, you're sloppy at work, it's going to transition over. It's going to carry over no matter where you are, what you do, or how you act. It's not just one day that you decide, like, hey, you know what? I do everything wrong in this instance, but I'm gonna do right in this one perfect instance if I'm ever in this situation. It's similar to like that the way that people handle money. They say, oh, if I ever became a millionaire, I'll just clean up all my bad financial habits, and and everything in life will be set for me. Well, if you can't manage $100, then you can't manage $1 million. So in that
Say that
regard,
one again too.
yeah, if you can't manage $100, you can't manage $1 million.
Okay, so I'm telling you, I knew you were going to be awesome. So he's hitting it out of the park. And so one of the things he said is, and there's actually a book by somebody, Suzanne Evans, I think. How you do one thing's how you do everything. So very accurate, right? You can't be lazy or sloppy in one part of your life and think that you're going to be disciplined. And that's what he's talking about. Self Self discipline, personal responsibility. You're either doing that in all of your life, or you're sloppy with those kinds of things in all your life. And he said something very powerful. If you can't manage $100, and I love this, Martin, because one of the things I tell people is, if I could give you $100 a week from now, that $100 is going to be gone. You can't tell me where it went, and that's not managing money. That's money managing you. One of the things that I learned in the Marines is one of the things that's true. And first off, I'd like to say thank you for your service, because you did the same thing I did in the Marines, right? Every day you stepped out the door, you weren't sure you're going to come home. And one of the things they taught us in the Marines when I first got to boot camp, and in boot camp, there were blacks, whites, American Indians, Asians, East Indians, Orientals. There was everybody. And they told us, you're all green, because we all had green uniforms. You're all green, and when you get shot, you're going to bleed red. Those are the two colors you need to be concerned about. So I'd like you to talk about how or one of the stories that you thought was fascinating that you'd like to share with the audience when you were a police officer.
Simple one is there was a traffic stop that I did on a gentleman, and this gentleman, I stopped him for speeding. Let's call it. I stopped him for speeding, and this dude, he could sell sand into the desert. I promise you, he had to get the gap. And my standard was, if you cross the line, I have a job to do. I have to arrest you. But again, there's some police officers that are like, oh, I could bend the rules here a little bit, but the standard was like, hey, If I stop you, I have to arrest you if you meet these qualifications. So I stopped him for speeding, and he didn't have any identification on him. He had a great excuse about why he didn't have identification on him. He had a great excuse about why he was speeding. He was like, "Hey, I'm on my way to the hospital. My girlfriend's having a baby. She's about to deliver right now. I can call her right now, and you can." You can listen to her yourself, yada yada yada. And I'm like, okay, well, let me just have your driver's license. Oh, I don't have any ID on me. Well, most I'm gonna say most officers, but some officers would hear that story and be like, all right, well, just slow down and have a nice day. I'm not even gonna worry about who you are and why you are speeding. But the standard was you have to identify somebody after you pull them over. And if you can't identify them, then you got to bring them to the station. Now, in the world we live in, where a lot of people want police officers that have great discretion, and to just be perfect and always make the right decision at the right time, this is one of those situations where if it got out to the media, this person was literally having a baby. He happened to left his wallet at home, and that's why he didn't have it. This could look unfavorably to the police officer. You pulling over this guy. So what? He was speeding. He's on his way to go be with his girlfriend who's having that first child. You should have just known better to just let him go and just cut him a break. Well, that wasn't my standard. It's like, hey, here's the rules, and here's how I'm going to apply it. Just all the way through. If I can't identify you, unfortunately, you got to come back to the station. And wind up getting him back to the station. Wind up turning out that the guy had a warrant for his arrest, and that his brother came up there to post bail. And the desk officer was like, "Oh, how's mom doing? She's in the hospital. Is she having a baby?" The brother was like, "Wait, what?" He's like, "Listen, whatever my brother told you, he's a habitual liar. It's not true." And so one of those circumstances where you think it's just your normal everyday traffic stop. This guy has felony warrants for his arrest, and under normal circumstances, like I said, this guy had a great gift of gab. He could sell water to a fish. He literally was to the point where he's about to talk himself out of it. Like, I'm like, hey, you know what? This is the standard. Don't fold on it. You got to do what you got to do. You got to bring him in. And, like I said, it wound up being he had felony warrants. So it's just one of those situations where it's like, all right, this is the standard. And as long as you follow the standard, you'll be all right. But it's when you try to, again, don't look at things as black and white. You try to look at the gray and try to have all these different mitigating circumstances, but why you shouldn't, follow the rules that you typically get yourself in trouble.
So, Martin, first off, that's a great story, and thanks for your courage to do the right thing. For our listeners and for those of you that are leaders, one of the things that Martin, now I know this about Martin. I see Martin on a weekly basis at a networking event, and him and I have a habit of we don't start our this networking without hugging each other. And so I want to be really clear. I know Martin's heart, and what he just talked about, that story, I know that he did that from a place of kindness and compassion without having to be a jerk, right? A lot of people have power, authority, and it goes to their head. The other thing that Martin talked about in there was not leaving that standard. And as a leader, Martin was being critiqued by other people, and he didn't let a thing called peer pressure, because the story could have been true, but he didn't let this thing called peer pressure drive him away from the standard and his own integrity. So, Martin, again, thanks for being such a great role model. I'd like you to share one more story where that you were kind of in that same scenario, and you could have gone one way or the other.
I mean, I feel like literally every traffic stop is a matter of the situation where you could have went left, you could have went right. I'm trying to think of some good ones for you. I mean, I could tell you about some guns, some drugs. I could tell you about a lot of different things. One of the most unlikely arrests that I've gotten, which was kind of comical to me at the time, was I was working midnights, working some overtime, and some girl she was speeding or something like that, and I pulled her over. And as soon as I walk up to the car, I could smell the odor of cannabis just emanating from the vehicle. Like it hit me like a punch in the face, right? And so I'm like, wow. But again, one of the things in our department is like I've literally showed up to traffic stops to assist other officers, and they were like, it's just some teenage girl who's probably got a little bit of weed. I'm not even going to bother searching her. I'm not even going to bother pulling her out of the car. I'm not even going to bother asking her about it. Just it's just weed. I used to smoke a little bit of weed when I was in high school. That was the mentality. So it's like I'm not even going to bother with it. And so I pull her over and I could just it just hits me in the face. And so I was like, all right, let me do my due diligence. And at the very least, pull her out of the car and, just ask her some basic questions. Just doesn't hurt to ask, especially when I have, reasonable suspicion that you clearly are, committing a crime, So I pull her out and I'm like, how much cannabis you got on you? She's like, oh, I got a little bit of something. I was like, all right, well, what's a little bit? She's like, well, I got, 28 ounces. And I was like, 28 grams or 28 ounces? And at this point, my mind's working like, wait, I'm used to people having half a gram maximum. Like I'm at that point, my mind is thinking about the legal statute. It's like, all right, wait, how much of a higher crime is this at this point? She said 28 ounces. I'm like, so long story short, she we go through the vehicle, we go in his backpack, and literally in his backpack, she literally had about 28 ounces of weed that she was essentially a drug dealer. But so much of our mental bias, and again, as a police officer, like how many female drug dealers do you run across? Like, and so right there, like I said, there was hesitation in my mind to should I even pull this girl out? Like, how many girls have I arrested who had a substantial amount of weed? I could tell you at that point, I had none. Any girl that I had pulled over, they probably had like a little roach or something like that, or they had less than a gram of weed. Nobody had 28 ounces worth of weed, so it was like so much hesitation. But again, my standard was my standard. Hey, follow this process, apply unilaterally. Doesn't matter if you're grandma, don't matter if you're a young teenage girl, doesn't matter if you're an old man. This is the standard applied to everybody. And do just following that standard. And again, just leading by example as well too, because guys will show up on my traffic stop and they was like, man, how are you getting some of these crazy arrests that you're getting? I'm like, hey, this is my standard. If you just apply the standard unilaterally, you treat them with respect, you can get the same arrest as well too. And literally, it just had me as one of the highest producing officers in my department, just following that simple standard over and over again.
So I want you to listen. I want you to catch what he just said. What he just said is flipping gold. It's magic. He had the standard. He followed it over and over and over. If you're a leader, whether you're a leader in a family, an organization, your company, wherever it may be, if you set that standard, consistently follow it, you're going to get better results in your client satisfaction, in your sales and marketing, in the relationships you have with your family, your employees, your vendors, your clients. That right there is worth the price of admission alone. Most leaders in the things in the day-to-day decisions, they're not making life and death decisions, right? Yet every day you got out of your squad car and you walked up to a brand new stop, a fresh client, so to speak, you didn't know who you were walking up to. How did you overcome that fear?
To be honest with you, I was called for a higher purpose. I truly believe that during my time when I was a police officer, it was my duty, it was my responsibility to not to change the world, but to change the corner of the world that I lived in. And so, with that being said, every traffic stop that I went up to, I was like, I don't know if this person's going to have, a shotgun. I don't know if he's going to be, on his way to go create some heinous crime, or if it's just going to be, some person who just having a bad day and maybe they just committed a traffic stop or something like that. But to me, it was my responsibility to protect those who needed to be protected. And so when I signed up to be a police officer, that was my mindset. It was like, hey, you're going to walk into some serious situations, but you're going to still need to take action in spite of that fear. And every traffic stop, I can tell you, I had a little bit of fear. Every traffic stop that I walked up on, that I walked to the person. And there's nothing wrong with being afraid, but sometimes you still need to take action in spite of that fear. And that's exactly what I did. I took action in spite of my fears. I took action in with a traffic stop, or whether it was, getting married or having kids, or whether it's starting a new business. There's always a little bit of fear, but, you know, taking action in spite of that fear, that was my mindset of like, hey, I have a higher purpose, I have a higher calling. And so I need to take action in spite of my fear. So
Yeah, and so again, and so Martin is a great example of, like I said, he was a little to coin a phrase and a pun, he was a little gun shy of coming on the podcast, but he is like, I believe all of it. He's got this profound wisdom, and one of the things that he just said is that he felt the fear every traffic stop when he got out of his car to walk up to that car, he felt the fear. But he did this. He took action. When you take action, you have the ability to overcome your fear. And he wasn't careless. He didn't say he ran up to that car, and he didn't break his standards and his rules and his process, but he took action and overcame the fear. And really, the sweet things in life, as a buddy of mine, Mike Jones, says, the sweetest fruit is out on the skinny branches, right? And you got to have the courage to get out on the skinny branches, and sometimes they may break. So I'd like to transition now. And one of the things I completely and truly believe with all my heart is, as business owners, and Martin, I'm sure you'll echo this. Martin owns a printing company in Libertyville, and he's done amazing things for a number of my companies. But I believe our business is our spiritual practice. It's how we help, serve, and heal the world. And Martin was clear at that point in his life. His purpose was to protect those who needed to be protected and to enforce the laws. And so when you have that kind of purpose, that also helped him overcome the fear. Martin, would you tell us the story of how you transitioned from or maybe what the decision process was to leave being a police officer and break out into be an entrepreneur and start your own company?
Well, I think I've always kind of had the entrepreneur bug in me since I was a little kid. I literally, one of my first businesses that I've ever did was I was washing cars, flagging people down. Hey, I wash a car for $5. Going to school in high school, selling candy to other students. Already kind of had that entrepreneurial mindset, and I recognized that from a financial standpoint, where I wanted to go, I could only get so far doing a traditional 9 to 5 job. And so it just was in me to try something new, to try something different. And I was having success in real estate. And I probably should back up a little bit. I became an accidental landlord when I bought my first property, and I tried to sell it and I couldn't sell it for what I wanted to. And so I was like, you know what? My father's a landlord, my brother's a landlord, my sister's a landlord. I can give it a try. If they can do it, I can do it. And so I've held on to that property, and few years later, I looked up and I was like, hey, you know what? I hadn't even touched any of that money from that tenant who's living in that property. And, it's got me a nice little nest egg. If I had about, 9 more of these, I wouldn't have to work anymore. And so a light bulb moment came on at that point where it's like, all right, how do we do this competently and efficiently to where we can retire early? And so that started my real estate journey. And I started acquiring one property after the next, putting systems in place to duplicate uh, what I did with one property. And when things wouldn't go right with one property, I was like, all right, I'll sit back, I'll reassess, figure out like, all right, what could I've done better here? Where did things go right? Where did things go wrong? How can we improve on our systems and our operations? And then I would acquire next property and next property. And then, next thing I had multiple properties, and I was like, hey, I don't think I have to work anymore. So with that being said, there was kind of a changing of a guard that was coming in the police world, and quite frankly, it didn't sit well with me. There was a lot of different things going on, and I don't want to go into too many details about it. But long story short, it was time for me to make a change. And so, with me wanting to make a change, I started looking into opening up another business outside of real estate. And me and my wife started looking together, and she suggested a printing company, and we started looking together, and we stumbled upon Minuteman Press, which is just one of the best franchises for commercial printing. They're actually the number one franchise when it comes to commercial printing. So we signed up with them, and we were off and running from there.
Martin, this is flipping unbelievable. Mind blowingly. So he just nailed three things that I want you to gather. If you're not a business owner, and then that's okay. But he said something very, very, very powerful. He had some financial goals. If you trade your time for money, there's a ceiling. And for those of you that are listening and not watching, I've got one hand flat and I'm banging my other hand up against it. You can only work so many hours in a day. I share with people all the time, Martin, even if I pay you $1,000 an hour, there's only so many hours in a day that you can work, and you've hit your ceiling. When you become a business owner, you can exponentially increase your income and your influence. And so it's a great way to grow your pay beyond that. He also said something, and he said it in passing. And I love this when I interview people, because to them, this is Martin just being Martin, and he doesn't even realize how amazing he is to himself. And sure, he knows he's a great guy, but he just said something, and I hope you all caught it. His dad owned rental property. His sister did. His brother did. Remember, you've probably all heard you're the influence of the five people you spend the most time with. You think Martin hangs out with his family, and he got this influence of they were all landlords, and then the thought occurred to him to be a landlord. Check out who you're hanging around with. Martin's hanging around with the family members that are doing the same things, and they all have success. Very powerful. Stop hanging out with the chuckleheads. Stop hanging out with the people Martin used to pull over smoking your pot. and then the next thing he said, I built a system. I'm a huge system guy. And when you build a system, one of the things I'll share with our audience is Martin in our networking group where we first crossed, actually we first crossed paths at a different meeting, and him and I just hit it off right from the beginning. But one of the things he talked about is he built a system. So now when you have a system, it can be scalable and repeatable, and you don't have to be doing all the work all the time. One of the things he talked about is that when you could systematize it, you can move further down the road. What are the top 2 or 3 things that you learned about leadership as a police officer that you consistently and daily apply, being the leader of a company and the leader of a family?
Leading by example. Definitely leading by example. I mean, me personally, I don't always have the gift of gab. I'm not the person who I would say, it's like Leonidas who, will lead 300 troops into battle. But I'm like, what, if I can lead you with my actions versus my words, then people have a tendency to follow. I'm like, hey, these are the things that I want you to do, and I'll show you by doing it myself. Aside from, just leading with my actions, I would say I tell people that I love them. I offer words of affirmation, encouraging people to be the best version of themselves.
Yeah, I've watched you live that, and I would also like to reiterate what he said to our audience. So again, and this is what I share with people: even when you're pumping gas, somebody's watching you, right? If you're the chucklehead out there pumping gas on your cell phone, if somebody's watching you be a chucklehead with a cell phone in your hand when you're pumping gas and there's a possibility of a fire. And the other thing he said, I'm just in the middle of I read it and I'm now re-listening to it. How to Win Friends and Influence People. One of the things they talk about is what Martin just hit that nail on the head too. When you look for people doing the good things, the right things, and you appreciate them, you verbally let them know that they're doing good things and say positive things to them, you're going to get more of those kinds of actions and results instead of focusing on what you don't want. The next thing I like to ask people is, do you have a book, a specific book that you've read that made a big difference in your life? And if so, what was the book and how did it make a difference?
Oh man, I'm big on financial literacy because obviously where I came from, it wasn't something that was readily taught and readily available information. And so it's a financial book by Scott Trench called "Set for Life." It gives you a step-by-step guide on how to um, invest your money and essentially hit financial freedom within a relatively short time period, and more so than the norm of them telling you to work until you're 65 and then enjoy the best years of your life from there. So that's a really big one.
Yeah, and so, man, this has just been the most beautiful conversation, Martin. Because one of the things I want you to understand we all have. I was like Martin in a completely different place in that I was raised on the wrong side of the tracks. We didn't have a lot of money. We were actually bused to a higher income community. Felt like well, I'm sure some of the emotions and feelings you had. But my point is, I wasn't raised with financial literacy either. And I know both Martin and I are very, very successful. And so remember, we talk about this regularly here. Leaders are readers. And so whatever you don't know, you can pick up a book and learn how to do it. And it's very clear that Martin has done that. Martin, how can people connect to you, reach out to you, not only for printing ads, but just to hear some of your police stories and your humor and that kind of stuff? If there's somebody who wants to reach out to you and connect with you, and even like I said earlier, if there's a printer or a owner of a print company that's looking to get out and they're trying to retire and move on, how can people get a hold of you?
The best way probably to get hold of me online. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Facebook. You can probably find me under Martin Neal. I'm on LinkedIn as well under Minuteman Press Libertyville, or you can also find me under Martin Neal there as well on LinkedIn. And I think that's pretty much it. I think I listed my website and my store phone number as well for Minuteman Press.
Okay, thank you. And again, we'll put all those in the notes for those of you that want to reach out to Martin. Martin, again, I know you're a busy man and you got a lot cooking in your life, but thank you very much for taking the time. I'm really truly humble and honored to, one, to call you my friend, and two, to be able to share your wisdom with our audience. So thank you very much, brother.
No, thank you for having me, Louie. I appreciate it.
Thanks again for joining us and listening to this episode of Leadership and Love. I would like to challenge you to ask yourself, what's one thing that you heard today that you can implement immediately to improve your leadership and accelerate your growth? If you've gotten value out of this episode or learned something that you can implement today, we'd ask that you please share it with those that you care about. Our goal is to create more leaders who are leading with love.